I'll never forget what my friends said to me when they first brought up the name Jesus. They said he was teaching with authority, that he was interacting with people like me, people who were considered cursed and outcasts and sinful. They said he had come home to Capernaum, and they really thought that I should go and see them, or that they would bring me to go and see him. Of course, at that time in my life, many years ago, I was depressed. I was hopeless. And most of that depression and hopelessness came from my physical condition. You see, I had been paralyzed since a very young age. So there wasn't much motivation, despite my friends' enthusiasm. But they insisted. They insisted. And this wasn't going to be an easy journey. You see, we lived along the Sea of Galilee, but we weren't near Capernaum. And so these dedicated friends got the mat that I normally laid on, and they carried me. They carried me all the way to Capernaum. And when we arrived at Capernaum, I couldn't see. I was looking up at the sky as they carried me. But I could hear deep sighs once we got in the town and once we got near the house where Jesus was, and I wondered what their deep sighs were about. And I soon learned that the house where Jesus was absolutely packed. It was packed on the inside with people listening to him. It was packed in the doorway, and it was packed on the outside, row after row after row after row of people. And not only just people standing, but lots of people just like me. People who could not move. And I thought, there's no way. So many people like me in need here. Barrier between me and Jesus. Lost hope yet again. But these friends, they were determined. And around the back of the house where Jesus was teaching was an embankment. And so that crowd gathered around the house. It was like a half moon. And before I knew what was happening, my friends picked me up on that mat again. They took me around up that steep embankment that was right up against the back of that house. And pretty soon, with their great effort, they laid me down on the top of that roof. Next thing I knew, one of the friends had a stick, and he was slamming that stick down into the roof, and mud was going everywhere, and straw was going everywhere. One of my friends took off to get something. I didn't know what he was doing. Pretty soon, a little hole was open in that roof, and a couple of the friends started kicking with their heels. And the hole got larger and larger. And then the friend who went away came back. He came back with rope and began to tie each corner of that mat. When the hole in the roof was large enough, the four of them picked me up and began to lower me in. And the silence was deafening. The crowd was no longer talking about who this Jesus was. They were watching. And Jesus had stopped teaching as well. And the only noise that I heard was the sound of my friends grunting as they lowered the dead weight of my body down into that home. And my vision, the only vision that I had, was looking back up at that hole in the ceiling. And I don't remember much about that moment. It's a blur these many years from when it took place. But I do remember what Jesus said. He said, because of the faith of my friends, my sins were forgiven. Because of the faith of my friends, my sins were forgiven. Yes, I saw God that day when Jesus said, stand up, take your mat, and walk out of here. God was most certainly in that moment, but I will tell you what my greatest sin was that I was forgiven for that day. Was not seeing the love of God in those friends. Being blind to that, being so depressed in my own physical state that I never saw God in what those friends did to me. Carrying me the many miles, staying with me through the years, even though I had that horrible physical condition, not viewing me as sin, but as somebody who was worth their love. And then on that day, them having the effort, despite the number of people who were there, to break through a roof of someone's home and lower me at the feet of Jesus. Friends, that is where I saw the true love of God and what my friends and what my neighbors did for me that day. And I knew the moment when I stood up because of Jesus' healing and walked out that front door and the crowd parted like the parting of the Red Sea. I knew that my job and my new condition was to be a neighbor, to be a friend, to walk alongside like those 4 friends had walked alongside with me. So you won't read my name in the scriptures, but I'll tell you I was right there. I was right there in the graveyard when Jesus was with the man who was mentally ill, out of his mind, naked, running around the graveyard. And Jesus healed him, and I was there with a robe to clothe him. And I will tell you, I was there in the synagogue, holding the left arm of the man with the withered hand, making my way through the crowd to get him before Jesus so that Jesus might say, stretch out your hand. And I was there at the outskirts of the crowd, at the feeding of the 5,000 people, where there was a family who was so hungry and worried about where they would get a next meal for their children. And I said, come, let's go closer, because there is no longer a small amount of bread and fishes. Come closer and eat, my friends. And I was there with the blind man who Jesus touched. And he didn't see perfectly clear right away. He saw people, but they looked like trees. And I brought him a bowl of water to clean his eyes. And it's all because I saw God in the 4 friends who lowered me down to the feet of Jesus, and I was bound and determined to bring other people to his feet. Friends, every time I see a crack somewhere, every time I see a hole in a wall or a hole in the ceiling, I don't just see broken places that need to be fixed. I see the hole in that ceiling that day that my friends lowered me down through, like I was being born anew. And every time I see a doorway, I see an opportunity to walk through that doorway and be a neighbor to someone in need. Amen.